So we were discussing non-tariff barriers. Remember, administrative guidance, strategic trade policies, targeting strategic industries, and non-tariff barriers. Non-tariff barriers are those barriers, as I just explained in our previous lecture. These are barriers with an equivalent effect of tariffs. So these are designed to shut off competition stemming from external competitors. So foreign competition, you shut off pressures stemming from those firms. So you want your own domestic industries to prosper, to continue with the process of industrialization. You treat your industries domestic industries as infant industries. You want to protect them. You want to have them flourish. And if and when they reach maturity, you will be exposing them to world markets, all kinds of competition. Okay? So these non-tariff barriers include licensing rules. So for example, if I produce these cups, and if I give a special license to Belize to produce this. Okay, so I pick her, I identify her. There are two Belizes, but I identify one of them, and I pick her and I say, okay, you have the special license to produce this, and you have a monopoly of producing this. Okay, so no other domestic competition can compete against you. Also, I say this is basically you're protecting your domestic industries against your domestic competitors or her domestic competitors. But what about international competitors? I say for this package, for this product to be sold in Turkey, everything has to be written in Turkish. So let's say this is a toothpaste package, and you're in Quebec, Canada, which is, Quebec is a, the official language is French, and if you want to import, let's say, one brand of toothpaste, and if that needs to come from the US, the package should read everything in French, or larger in French font and smaller in English font. So this produces another cost item in packaging. So in a way, you're increasing the costs of your competitor so that they would be less inclined to export toward your market, and you'd be protecting your domestic industries. Okay, so all kinds of barriers which have the effect of an import duty are called non-tariff barriers, right? So with all these kinds of protectionism, strategic trade sectors or strategic trade policies, industrial policies, you subsidize those exporting sectors, you give them cheap credit, you provide water, power almost free, you help them import machinery, tools, equipment at low import duty or no import duty. Okay, in a world of import protection, you let them import all these goods at low cost or no cost. Okay, you give them land for free. You give them you provide them with all kinds of resources at a lower rate or at a lower price. Those raw materials that you as a state are producing, for example. So you subsidize, you support, you sponsor, you help them flourish, you help them industrialize, you encourage them to industrialize, and then if and when they reach maturity, you'll expose them to world competitive markets. So that's the idea behind Japanese economic nationalism in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So the developmental state was very important, and it was based on, the previous period's legacies of Zaibatsu. Okay, what happens to the developmental state? What happened was mid-1980s, 86 to 91, assets prices of, or in Japan had been rising. So we're not talking about commodities, but we're talking about real estate prices. So the prices had been ballooning, had been expanding, had been increasing. This was in a way a result of easy, uncontrolled monetary policies. Fiscal policies also helped expand credit, and with a lot of money coming into the economy, being injected into the economy, speculators thought, okay, let's invest in something, and in that case it was real estate, that their prices had been rising phenomenally, but their real worth in the market. Let's say we're talking about a 35 meter squared apartment in downtown Tokyo. Let's say its real market value is 1 million, but it is sold at 5 million in the market. Okay, $5 million. What happens is, if the price goes bust to 1 million, or even less than 1 million, because everybody needs money in times of crisis. Liquidity is much less. Money supply is very low. Then those buyers who had bought the apartment at 5 million or for 5 million based on a credit line from a bank, and you say, okay, here is the apartment as a collateral to you. So if I can't pay this 5 million, here is the apartment. But I got 5 million from the bank, but the real value of this apartment has come down to 800,000. I get bankrupt. I won't be able to pay my debt to the bank, and the bank will confiscate this asset and will sell it at only 800,000. Although I owe to the bank 5 million, this sells only, the collateral sells only at 800,000. What happens to the bank? Okay, so it faces the risk of default. So if everybody does this, then bank failures, one after another. So the bubble economy was that asset prices were increasing massively. This was facilitated by uncontrolled monetary policy, uncontrolled credit expansion, so easy fiscal policies, and when liquidity was needed, when money was needed in the economy, Bank of Japan started to suck up money, so withdraw money back. So it responded to the crisis by limiting money supply when it was most needed. Okay, so policy errors also accounted for for the problems associated with the crisis, with the bubble economy. So there was a recession, which went on for about at least a decade. Another reason behind the bubble economy was iron triangles. We've talked about iron triangles in the case of the US. We see similar cases. What were iron triangles made of? What were they constituted of? Remember, there was a private firm or private sector. There was a regulatory authority agency, and the legislature or congressional committee in that respect. So there were relationships which meant that this, or which, in crisis times, under prosperous circumstances, everything works like this. But when crisis hits, there may be political capture, which really impede any kind of structural reform. And this was the time, 1980s, when the ruling government, LDP, Liberal Democratic Party, pushed for globalization, to globalize Japan's economy. There was so much rush to globalize the Japanese economy, which was working like clockwork under state capitalism, okay? Under a certain type of capitalism, but expansion, opening up, rushing it meant also that all those factors contributed to the bubble economy and the ensuing and the subsequent recession afterwards. Agricultural protectionism also weakened domestic agriculture, rice production especially. So subsidies to agricultural firms meant that they also, these sectors, the agricultural sector became less competitive, less efficient. The state was behind the sector with all kinds of supports, all kinds of incentives, all kinds of subsidies. And when the state was out, the sector was going down the drain. The financial sector had always been, had never been weak, but increasingly weak with the onset of the bubble economy. It had been remaining under state control, state protection, but it had been under tight administrative guidance. We have seen, Japan Post as a large financial corporation, which was later privatized. So all of the bubble economy, 1980s, second half of 1980s, until 1991, end of 1991, all of this were happening against such background. So when the bubble economy burst, the bubble burst in the economy, then the entire economy went into a recession. Okay, economic activity, booming economic activity turned into bust. Okay, this was the largest, insurance company in addition to postal services. With the banks failing, with some firms, many firms failing, this meant that the insurance company itself was facing default. Okay, so the recession really hit Japan end of 1991, beginning of 1992, really, really hard. Next comes, I want to talk about the private sector, organization of the private sector. Remember we talked about the case of the Zaibatsu. The Zaibatsu were there they were, fostered, they were sponsored, they were created, they were consolidated under Meiji rule. So it was the Meiji period that expanded, that saw the expansion of the Zaibatsu. With the World War II, after World War II, they were divided into smaller firms. There are two principles of organizing the new firm structure. We call these firms no longer zaibatsu, but we call them keiretsu. Okay? These are interdependent and networking firms. Some are giant firms, some are small firms. And it's a networked system of firms. It's a coordinated system of firms. It's in that respect, again, coordinated. It features coordinated market economy features, characteristics, and all of these follow two different logics, or some of these follow the horizontal linkage or organization logic, and others follow vertical linkage logic. The horizontally linked firms, imagine firms like this. They're linked together horizontally. Vertically, there's a parent firm, and there are subsidiaries under it. So horizontally is that there is a major firm, major bank, a major manufacturing institution, a major trading institution, a shipping institution, a shipping firm, a construction firm, and an insurance firm, all linked together horizontally, none of which is parent to the other. They're like co-equal partners in this horizontally linked organization. The Mitsubishi Group of 30 or so formally independent but networked firms. We have co-equal corporations, co-equal branches, each of which is a leading firm in their own sectors. We have Mitsubishi Motors, the automotive company. Is that a Mitsubishi air conditioner? That's a Toshiba. Okay, that's the other one. So we have manufacturing company, motor company. We have Nikon. We also have Kirin Brewery, and we used to have Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi. Okay, so all of these are making up the conglomerate, and they're horizontally linked. They're formally independent, but they're networked. So this is one form of horizontal integration. Another form is, once again, vertical integration. Here we have a parent company and smaller alliances built around that company. One example is the Toyota Group, underneath of which we have 10 to 15 large corporations having subcontracting relationships with more than 250 firms. So we have the Toyota company, parent company, and large corporations, each of which are, again, leading in their sectors, leading firms in their sectors, and they also branch out through subcontractors. So again, as you can see, there's a lot of networking, or being networked organization-wise. They are legally independent, but operationally interdependent, these firms. And vertical lines link small firms to large firms, and all of those large firms to the parent company. But from the 1990s onwards, all of these post-World War II inventions, horizontal integration, vertical integration, or horizontal linkages and vertical linkages are under the threat of foreign mergers and foreign acquisitions. Okay, so all of these are threatened by hostile takeovers especially from the 1990s onwards. When we look at employment and social policy, we see rising labor force participation among women. In Japan, this has been uncharacteristic of the pre-World War II period. So this has been changing. This has been expanding. And we see closer cooperation between unions, labor unions, and management. That's also a phenomenon of post-World War II era. Before then, we didn't have that. But, again, the German economic miracle or the German economic model was in a way diffused or transferred to the Japanese way of organizing industrial relations. Relative poverty increasing with the population aging. So aging population means relative poverty is increasing and increasing or expanding of atypical forms of work. So non-standard forms of work. They're all increasing. So non-regular workers, their number is increasing. Government spending on social welfare and public benefits is decreasing. So all of these, the Japanese welfare state spending was geared towards lower income groups, but expenditures had been lowering, especially from the 1990s onwards. One very interesting feature in Japan is the institution of lifetime employment. So we do not have a standard pension, nationwide pension program as we see in Northwestern Europe. So employment is almost lifetime in the sense that we have employees working for the firm, being loyal to the firms that they have been working for almost their lifetime. So there's no retirement, the institution of retirement. So in Northwestern Europe, you see with the age of, as you come to the age of 65, you're more or less retiring. But in Japan, this is not the case. Culturally, older workers still remain in the labor force and continue working for the firm they've been working for all throughout their lives. So that's also very interesting feature in Japanese industrial relations and also Japanese society. So job security is in a way guaranteed till actual retirement, which is when you're incapacitated, when you cannot work any longer. So that's also a typical feature of Japanese industrial relations, which has been changing to a certain extent, to a limited extent. What does the Japanese state in world markets look like? There has been rapid industrialization, as we've seen, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, which was based on export-led development, export-led industrialization, export-led growth. So export-led development strategy was the name of the game. So all kinds of subsidies, supports, incentives to exporting firms, picking of national champions and all that. And this model was emulated by the newly industrializing countries, NICs, the East Asian tigers, so-called. Okay, So Japan became a superpower in the region, economic superpower in the region, and it was also a model. It provided to other countries, other nations, a model of industrialization. So other countries followed suit by mimicking, emulating the Japanese model. Japan had seen years and years of trade surpluses, so it really became a trading nation, especially after World War II. Remember, until the Meiji period, Japan was following an isolationist strategy. Then later on, expansion was the name of the game, but for centuries, it was isolated from all kinds of external influence. But with World War II onwards, in that particular period, we see Japan as a trading nation, exports, primarily focusing on industrial goods, imports, primarily food, raw materials, fuel, like oil, but some increasingly industrial goods. But this meant that exports almost always exceeded imports, and this meant that Japan was a model trading nation, especially, in the period after World War II. There were trade disputes with the US. Japan was accused of protectionism, economic nationalism, especially from the 50s till the 1980s. As we've seen, Japan invented a set of non-tariff barriers, so they were really following a strategy of protectionism. They were really following a strategy of economic nationalism. And they were accused in the world political economy as following those non-liberal policies. The world was liberalizing. Japan was not sufficiently liberalizing. So that was one of the frictions between Japan and her counterparts in the Western liberal system. Increasingly criticized, but from the 1990s onwards, Japan started to respond to those criticisms. It implemented what are called voluntary export restraints. It responded in a way to tackle those non-liberal forms of protectionism. So it is in this period that 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s that we see Japan as a world, superpower in the sense of an economic power, and this period coincides with the Japanese economic miracle, industrialization, state-led industrialization under the auspices of a developmental state, which is a certain type of archetypical form of state-led development, carried out by the hand of a certain type of 20th century interventionist state. And all of this produced the Japanese economic miracle, and it led to the emergence of what's called a trading state. So Japan became a trading state in the post-World War II era. When I was growing up, the best quality goods, toys, materials were made in Japan. So it is a recent phenomenon that everything became made in China. And many scholarly work argues that China emulated, followed Japanese ways of organizing your economy, and also state capitalist ways of industrializing or processes of industrialization. So everything that was the best quality 70s were made in made in Japan, and that was the time when Japanese products were infesting world markets. So it was Japan. It was a time when the Japanese economic model was referred to as Japan Inc., Japan Incorporated, okay, as a form of organizing your political economy, as a form of, or as a novel form of, or model of organizing your industry, your firm structures. So any questions from Japanese economic miracle, Japanese developmental state? Please.
But was it crucial damage for this transition?
Was it a crucial?
Damage for the economy. It was not so easy.
What do you mean? The bubble economy? 1990s, yes. Yes, 1990s was a decade of recession. Banking crises, asset prices plummeting, insurance companies collapsing. Japan had seen consecutive years of negative growth or no growth in the 1990s. So 1990s were years of when the Japanese economy could not deliver anymore. When I was a university student, I wrote a paper in one of my classes on Japanese economic miracle and Japanese economic nationalism that made possible this economic miracle. But when I was reading about the past, I also read news accounts of what was happening in that contemporary period back then, 1990s, 1993, 1994. Everything was going down the drain. The Japanese system, the Japanese model was seen as, it doesn't work anymore. So those years were years of recession. And those years were recessions of, in a way, failure. Policy failure, structural failures, structural problems in responding to those failures. But yes, Japan had been picking up, the economy had been picking up in the 2000s, but compared to the 60s, the 70s, it's not as competitive as it was. The Japanese economy is not as competitive as it was back in the 60s and 70s during the miracle years. Any other questions? Okay, let me start, depending on our time, where are we? Okay, perhaps another bit. Let me do a quick introduction to governance and policy making. What does the Japanese state look like? What does the organization of state look like? We have a case of unitary state, centralized state, where we have subnational government subordinate to the central government. So we have a unitary state, but a centralized unitary state. Okay? We have seen, among the 5 cases we have seen, the unitary cases are Britain. The second case was France. Okay, again unitary. Then 2 federal cases, Germany and the US, going back to the unitary model once again. Okay, another model of unitary state. Constitutional monarchy, we have the emperor, and we have parliamentary democracy. And parliamentary democracy post-World War II period, 1950, 1949, 50, and we have a predominant party regime, as I shall be talking about later, but we have political stability, economic growth, unitary state, centralized unitary system, political system, and parliamentary democracy. We have the legislature named Diet. It's a bicameral structure, House of Councillors, House of Representatives, members of which are popularly elected. The Diet elects the Prime Minister in a way, or the Prime Minister and the Cabinet comes out of the Diet, okay, like in a parliamentary system, usual parliamentary system. It is the Diet, it is the legislature which enacts laws. So we do not have a presidential system here. It's a typical parliamentary system. And the legislation, regulations, rules are implemented by the bureaucracy, which is part of the executive, okay? So it's the implementing tentacles, the arms of the executive. It's the House of Representatives, the lower house, which is the more powerful, which is, again, typical of all parliamentary systems. It is the more powerful, it is larger, and it incorporates a vote of no confidence in the sense that members enjoy the institution of vote of no confidence in the sense that if and when the government loses the confidence of the legislature, then it can be voted out of office, the executive. When we look at the executive, we see the Prime Minister, not the Emperor. We see the importance, the centrality, significance of the Prime Minister. He is the chief executive of government. The Prime Minister comes out of the Diet, the legislature, and he must, I refer to him as a he because it's always been a he must be a member of parliament. When you look at Japan's history, you see, post-World War II period, of course, you see rotating of prime ministers every 2 to 3 years, or sometimes a year or two. Shinzo Abe is an exception in that regard. He's been serving since 2012 as one of the longest standing prime ministers. Prime ministership or premiership is an institution in a given party which is based on seniority. So you have to be among the senior members of the party to lead the party. And once again, there has been frequent turnover of prime ministers in the post-World War II history of Japan. When you look at the cabinet, the prime minister has absolute authority in terms of appointing as well as dismissing members of the cabinet. So there's that kind of discipline in that respect. So it is the prime minister who is really responsible and accountable. So it is unlike the British system of collective responsibility. The members of the cabinet follow ordinary cabinet duties, ordinary ministerial duties, that is. The cabinet advises the emperor, so it has an advisory role to the emperor. It does designate Chief Justice to the Supreme Court. So as you can see, there is a link between the executive and the judiciary. So being able to designate Chief Justice to Supreme Court gives the executive some power over the subsequent decisions of the Supreme Court. And they appoint judges, high-ranking judges to all courts. So it is the executive, in a way, not controlling, but staffing. So indirectly controlling through staffing parts of the higher echelons of the judiciary. When you look at the bureaucracy, there are ministries, of course. These ministries are very important. We talked about MITI, which later turned to other ministries. So Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Industry, International Trade. These are very influential ministries which form the heart of the Japanese bureaucracy, Japanese executive, Japanese state. The ministries follow both regulatory as well as custodial powers. So they have supervisory duties and privileges. They also are regulating by proposing rules, regulations, and also bills to the parliament. MPs, we have members of parliament as ministers, and we also have career officials who work as first secretaries or undersecretaries in the system, like the way we have in this country. We have undersecretaries, career officials, directing, administering, governing ministerial bureaucracies. And we have vertically divided administration in the sense that it's a hierarchical system of, these ministries, ministerial bureaucracies are hierarchical. There's rank and file. In the past, 50s, 60s, 70s, ministerial positions were of very high prestige, very high power. It was extremely competitive. You had to go through the Chinese, inherited from China, the system of examinations to be able to be part of ministerial bureaucracies. And especially if you were part of MITI, you were in a way treated like gods, or kings and queens. They were very important positions. You were in command. You had a lot of power. You had a lot of prestige, especially in post-World War II period. But it had been the power and prestige of staff had been waning, especially from the late 1980s, but much more so from the 1990s onwards. When you look at government expenditures as a share of GDP, you see Japan on a par with the US. So this is a liberal market economy. The role of the state, laissez-faire is very important, although there were many exceptions, as you will remember, that there was a lot of regulation being carried out by the American administration, the American government. Japan is, in terms of government expenditure, is larger than that of US. France and UK are the highest spenders. Germany is in between those high spenders and spenders are towards the lower end. So Japan's government expenditures is lower than those in Northwestern Europe, those countries in Northwestern Europe. And once again, these ministries are very important in ruling the country, and especially the role of MITI was very significant in the period of industrialization, in the period following World War II. So this is what the executive looks like in general. I think I should end here because time is running. It's about lunchtime. So, so next class we'll continue with organization of the state, and then we'll start talking about representation and participation. So see you next class.